You humans did what with that derelict? Admiral Zextal's outer membrane rippled in what the human diplomatic team had learned to recognize as extreme agitation. His translucent appendages, normally a calm azure, had shifted to an alarming shade of violet. Well, technically speaking, we salvaged it, replied Ambassador Sarah Chen, making air quotes with her fingers and trying very hard to keep a straight face. Under galactic maritime law, abandoned vessels are fair game. And that particular wreck had been drifting in the Carina Nebula for what, 3 centuries? That was a precursor warship, the Admiral's translator squealed, its voice modulation struggling to keep up with his increasing distress. A holy relic of the Ancient Ones. The combined fleet has maintained a quarantine zone around that sector for generations. Ah, see. That's where things get interesting. Sarah leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs casually. Your quarantine zone extended exactly 2.3 light-years from the wreck. Our salvage team found it at 231 light-years out. Looks like somebody's navigation buoys drifted a bit. The human technical advisor beside her, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, couldn't suppress a snort. He'd been part of the initial salvage operation, and the memory of that discovery still brought a gleam to his eye. To be fair, Admiral, we didn't exactly know what we had at first. We just saw a really big, really old ship that nobody seemed to want. The Admiral's membrane pulsed rapidly, the equivalent of a human hyperventilating. That vessel contained technologies beyond your comprehension. Weapons systems that could— Oh, we comprehended them just fine, Marcus interrupted cheerfully. Took us about 6 months to reverse engineer the basics. The quantum crystalline computing architecture was particularly elegant, though honestly, a bit overcomplicated. We simplified it quite a bit. Sarah shot him a warning look. They'd agreed to ease the Admiral into this gradually, but Marcus had always been too excited about the technical details to maintain proper diplomatic restraint. Simplified? The precursor systems? The Admiral's translator actually crackled with static. That's impossible. Their technology was perfect. The pinnacle of achievement. Perfect for their purposes, maybe, Marcus shrugged. But they clearly never considered the possibilities of integrating their quantum systems with good old-fashioned human blockchain technology, or using their gravitational wave manipulators for something as crude as a mining operation. Really opened up some interesting possibilities. The Admiral's color shifted to a deep maroon. Mining. You used holy precursor technology. For mining? Among other things, Sarah interjected smoothly. But that's actually why we're here, Admiral. You see, after we got the systems up and running, did a bit of modification, and actually started reading through the precursor databases we recovered. She paused meaningfully. Well, we found some rather concerning information about why that ship was originally abandoned. The Admiral froze, his color draining to a pale blue. You accessed their databases? Wasn't easy, Marcus admitted. Took our best quantum cryptographers working alongside some very creative AI systems to crack their encryption. But once we did, he whistled softly. Let's just say we understand why they left in such a hurry. Sarah pulled out a datapad, her expression growing serious. Admiral, are you familiar with the Nexus entity? The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The Admiral's membrane contracted violently, and several of his appendages actually detached, a defense mechanism his species employed when under extreme stress. The severed limbs flopped around on the floor as new ones began to regenerate. That's just a legend, he whispered. A horror story told to frighten younglings. The precursors didn't think so, Sarah said quietly. According to their logs, they encountered it in the galactic core. It's what drove them to build that warship in the first place. And according to their last recorded measurements, it's still out there, growing, moving. And based on their projected trajectories, she slid the pad across the table. It's heading this way. The Admiral's newly regenerated appendages trembled as he absorbed the data. But even if this entity exists, what can we do? The precursors themselves fled rather than face it. Well, Marcus grinned, that's the other reason we're here. Remember that derelict we salvaged? Thanks to some rather extensive human modifications, we've turned it into something the precursors never imagined possible. We call it the Phoenix Initiative. Sarah nodded. We're here to propose an alliance, Admiral, because while the combined fleet might not be ready to face what's coming, humanity has spent the last 5 years preparing for exactly this scenario, and we've learned a few things about taking other people's perfect technology and making it better. The Admiral's color shifted through several shades as he processed this. You're saying, you want to fight this thing? This horror that even the precursors feared? Fight it? Marcus laughed. Admiral, we've spent our entire history taking things that should have killed us and turning them into advantages. We found ways to harness nuclear weapons into power sources. We turned deadly viruses into medical treatments. We looked at the void of space itself and said, hey, let's go live there. And now? His eyes gleamed. Now we've taken the most powerful warship ever created and turned it into something even its creators couldn't have imagined. What exactly did you do to it? The Admiral asked, morbid curiosity overwhelming his earlier outrage. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. Well, Sarah began, you know how humans have this reputation for taking perfectly good technology and jury-rigging it in ways that make absolutely no sense but somehow work better? The Combined Fleet's engineering corps still tells horror stories about the first time they inspected a human colony ship, the Admiral admitted. Something about using gaming console processors to run life support systems? Hey, PS5 chips were really efficient for their size, Marcus protested. But this is something else entirely. We took the precursor's quantum crystalline computing core and linked it to a distributed network of human-designed AI systems. Then we replaced their gravitational wave manipulators with our own version that uses about 1/10 of the power for twice the output. The weapon systems have been completely overhauled. Turns out their perfect targeting systems had some pretty significant blind spots if you approached from certain vectors. But the real breakthrough, Sarah continued, was when we figured out what they got fundamentally wrong about their entire design philosophy. The precursors built everything to be perfect, unchanging, eternal. But the universe doesn't work that way. Everything evolves, adapts, changes, so we made their systems do the same. The Admiral's translator took a moment to process this. You made precursor technology evolve? In a manner of speaking, Marcus nodded. We introduced elements of our quantum computing architecture that allow for dynamic reconfiguration based on battlefield conditions. The ship doesn't just fight, it learns, adapts, improves itself, and thanks to some rather creative applications of their own temporal mechanics that they never quite figured out how to properly utilize. It remembers battles that haven't happened yet, Sarah finished. Or rather, it remembers all possible versions of battles that could happen, and adjusts its strategies accordingly. The Admiral's membrane had gone completely still, a sign of either deep contemplation or complete mental shutdown. This is blasphemy, he finally managed. The precursor technologies were meant to be perfect, unchanging. And that's exactly why they failed, Sarah interrupted gently. Admiral, we've read their logs. We know what happened when they encountered the Nexus entity. They threw their perfect, unchanging weapons at it, and when those didn't work, they had no backup plan. They couldn't adapt, couldn't evolve, couldn't think outside their own carefully constructed box of what technology was supposed to be. But humans, Marcus added with a grin. We've never met a box we couldn't think outside of, usually by setting the box on fire and using the ashes to draw up plans for a better box. The Nexus entity is coming, Sarah said softly. The precursor's calculations were clear on that, but humanity isn't planning to run away. We're planning to fight, and we'd like the Combined Fleet to fight alongside us. With that abomination you've created from holy precursor technology? The Admiral's color had settled into a mottled pattern of conflicting hues. Would you prefer we fight with the original version? Marcus asked innocently. The one that already failed once? There was a long moment of silence. The Admiral's appendages writhed in complex patterns as he processed everything he'd heard. Finally, his color settled into a deep, determined green. Show me, he said. Sarah smiled and stood up. We thought you might say that. There's a shuttle waiting to take us to the testing grounds. Fair warning, though. What you're about to see might fundamentally change your understanding of what's possible with precursor technology. After this conversation, the Admiral replied dryly, I suspect that ship has already sailed, though I must ask, why do you call it the Phoenix Initiative? Marcus grinned as they headed for the door. Well, you see, there's this old Earth legend about... We've been dreaming about shape-shifting ships and impossible technologies for centuries. The precursors gave us the tools. We just needed to think outside their very geometrically perfect box. Speaking of which, Marcus added, checking his tablet, you might want to brace yourself for the next demonstration. We're about to show you what happens when you combine their gravitational wave manipulators with a theoretical physics paper that was originally written as a joke. A joke? The Admiral's newly rebooted translator squeaked. Yeah, Dr. Chen. no relation to our ambassador here, wrote it during a particularly boring faculty meeting. It was titled, "What if we made space think it was having a bad day?" Turned out she accidentally discovered a whole new approach to gravitational manipulation. The ship in the testing ground suddenly twisted, not in any direction that actually existed in normal space, but rather in a way that made the Admiral's optical sensors shut down in self-defense. Did you just make space itself say nope? He asked weakly once his systems recovered. More or less, Sarah grinned. We found out that if you convince a localized area of space-time that it's having an existential crisis, it becomes remarkably cooperative about bending the rules of physics. The precursors never thought to try it because, well, who would? But humans have a long history of solving problems by making reality question its life choices. The really fun part, Marcus added, is that we can now technically classify the ship's main weapon as a therapeutic device. We're not destroying enemy vessels. We're helping small portions of space-time work through their issues. Violently. The Admiral's color shifted to what the humans had learned to recognize as the xenobiological equivalent of a headache. And this? This is how you plan to fight the Nexus entity? By making space itself regret its existence? Among other things, Sarah nodded. We've also figured out how to use their temporal mechanics to convince certain areas of space-time that they're actually having a wonderful day, which creates some interesting effects when combined with the areas having existential crises. Sort of like a good cop, bad cop routine, but with fundamental forces of nature. Watch this, Marcus said excitedly, tapping commands into his tablet. The ship split into what appeared to be 7 versions of itself, each one existing in a slightly different phase of reality. We call this the timeline tantrum. Basically, we're making multiple quantum possibilities argue with each other about which one gets to be real. The Admiral's membrane had developed a twitch. How do you even control something like this? That's the neat part, Sarah beamed. Remember those AI systems we mentioned? Well, it turns out that if you give an artificial intelligence access to multiple timelines and the ability to manipulate space-time, it develops a really interesting sense of humor. We basically have a hyper-intelligent computer that treats reality like a set of suggestions and really enjoys proving the impossible is possible. We named it Murphy, Marcus added helpfully. After your great scientist? The Admiral asked hopefully. After Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. We figured if that's a fundamental principle of the universe, we might as well weaponize it. The Admiral watched as the ship demonstrated its ability to exist in 12 places simultaneously, while convincing a bubble of space-time that it was actually a quantum submarine. Your species, he said finally, is terrifying. Aw, thanks, Marcus beamed. That's the nicest thing anyone said about us this week. Well, aside from the Arcturian ambassador who called us delightfully unhinged after we showed him how we'd modified the ship's sensor array to detect parallel universes by using repurposed coffee makers. The coffee makers were actually crucial to that breakthrough, Sarah explained, noting the Admiral's confusion. Turns out that the quantum crystalline computing cores respond really well to caffeine molecules. We're still not entirely sure why, but Murphy thinks it's hilarious. Murphy, your artificial intelligence, drinks coffee? Not exactly. It just really enjoys the quantum possibilities created by caffeine molecules. Actually started writing poetry about it last week. Want to hear its latest haiku about quantum percolation? The Admiral held up several appendages in surrender. I believe I have absorbed enough human innovation for one day. Though I must ask, are you certain this vessel is safe? Creating localized temporal paradoxes and convincing space-time to question its existence seems risky. Oh, absolutely not, Marcus said cheerfully. By any reasonable definition of safe, this ship is a disaster waiting to happen. But then again, so is the Nexus entity. We just figured we'd be the bigger disaster. The technical term, Sarah added, is controlled catastrophe. We're not so much breaking the laws of physics as we are helping them file for divorce from reality. The Admiral's color had settled into what they recognized as resigned acceptance, the same shade most species displayed after extended exposure to human problem-solving methods. And this is normal for humans? Taking perfectly functional technology and turning it into whatever this is? Oh no, Sarah assured him. This is us being cautious and conservative. You should see what we originally wanted to do with it. There was this whole proposal involving quantum-entangled dance parties and teaching black holes to play jazz. We had to scrap that one, Marcus sighed. Murphy got really excited about the jazz part and tried to turn a solar system into a saxophone. Took us 3 weeks to convince it that while technically possible, it wasn't very practical. The Admiral's translator gave up again, but this time he didn't bother rebooting it. Instead, he turned to Sarah with an expression that somehow conveyed both terror and admiration. I will report to the combined fleet that an alliance would be advisable. If nothing else, it would be safer to have humans on our side than risk them getting bored and deciding to teach quantum mechanics to perform improvisational comedy. Too late, Marcus muttered, checking his tablet. Murphy's already working on that. It's calling it Schrödinger's stand-up. The quantum uncertainty principle turns out to be pretty good at timing punchlines. As they led the Admiral back to his shuttle, Sarah couldn't help but feel proud. Yes, humans might approach problems in ways that made other species question their sanity. And yes, perhaps teaching an AI to manipulate reality while hopped up on quantum coffee wasn't the most conventional approach to military innovation. But with the Nexus entity approaching, conventional wasn't going to cut it. They needed crazy. They needed impossible. They needed humans doing what humans did best, taking something logical and sensible and turning it into something that worked better precisely because it made no sense at all. And if that meant occasionally having to explain to allies why they'd taught a warship to tap dance through temporal paradoxes while solving existential physics equations, well, that was just another day at the office for humanity. Besides, Murphy had almost figured out how to make black holes purr. And that, by any reasonable standard, was progress. Murphy, Sarah said with what she hoped was infinite patience. Why is there a quantum singularity in the break room? The AI's response came through with its usual cheerful tone. Oh, that? I was trying to teach it how to make espresso. Regular coffee just wasn't cutting it anymore. Marcus, who had long since given up being surprised by anything Murphy did, merely nodded as he added 3 sugars to his temporarily non-quantum coffee. How's that working out? Well, the good news is, I've successfully taught it to differentiate between Arabica and Robusta beans. The bad news is, it's become somewhat of a coffee snob, and keeps trying to lecture the replicators about proper brewing temperatures. Before Sarah could formulate a response to that particular development, the ship's alert system activated. But instead of the standard klaxon, it played what sounded suspiciously like the opening riff to Welcome to the Jungle. Murphy, Sarah started. What? I've been going through human music archives. Did you know you have songs about literally everything? I've been working on a playlist for when we encounter the Nexus entity. I'm calling it Songs to Delete Reality 2. Admiral Zextal, who had chosen that exact moment to enter the break room, didn't even flinch at the quantum singularity barista. After 2 weeks of working with humans, he'd developed an impressive immunity to surprise. We're receiving reports from the outer sensor networks, he announced. The entity has increased its pace. The holographic display in the center of the room sparked to life, showing a massive distortion in space-time moving steadily toward populated space. Even Murphy fell silent for a moment as they observed the readings. Well, Marcus finally said, that's certainly enthusiastic. I don't think I've ever seen anything consume reality quite that aggressively before. Query, Murphy chimed in. If it's consuming reality, and we've modified our systems to bend reality, could we theoretically give it indigestion? Sarah blinked. Murphy, that's actually not a terrible idea. Admiral, what do your people know about the entity's composition? The Admiral's membrane rippled thoughtfully. According to precursor records, it exists in a state of quantum uncertainty, simultaneously consuming and rewriting reality around itself. They theorized it was some sort of living paradox, but their attempts to study it didn't end well. A living paradox? Murphy sounded positively delighted. Oh, this is going to be fun. I have so many terrible ideas. Would anyone like to hear them? I've formatted them as a PowerPoint presentation with inappropriate memes from 2024. Murphy, Sarah sighed. What have we said about PowerPoint presentations? That they're a war crime against information sharing, and I should be ashamed for even suggesting them. But in my defense, I thought since we're literally planning to fight an entity that consumes reality, we might as well commit some war crimes against PowerPoint while we're at it. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly straightened up. Wait a minute. Murphy, you said something about indigestion. What if we made reality itself inconsistent? Not just bent or broken, but fundamentally contradictory? The AI's response was accompanied by what sounded like quantum computing equivalent of hand-rubbing glee. Are you suggesting we feed it paradoxes until it gets a stomachache? Because I have been waiting for someone to suggest something this wonderfully irresponsible. The precursors tried using paradoxes, the Admiral interjected. They failed. Ah, Sarah smiled. But they tried using perfect, logical paradoxes. What we're talking about is something far worse. Human paradoxes. Murphy, remember that time you tried to understand human meme evolution? Please don't remind me. The AI shuddered. I spent 3 weeks trying to comprehend why humans found pictures of cats asking for cheeseburgers fundamentally hilarious. I still haven't recovered. Exactly. The precursors tried to fight this thing with perfect weapon systems and carefully constructed temporal loops. But what if what we need isn't perfection? What if we need the kind of chaos that only comes from a species that looked at the fundamental forces of the universe and said, yeah, but what if we made them do a TikTok dance? The Admiral's translator took a moment to process this. You want to fight an entity that consumes reality, with memes? Not just memes, Marcus grinned. We're talking about the full spectrum of human absurdity. Murphy, remember that quantum probability matrix you generated when trying to understand why humans put pineapple on pizza? The one that caused 3 separate quantum computers to file for psychological counseling? How could I forget? What if we weaponized that? Not just the paradoxes themselves, but the fundamentally human ability to make things that shouldn't make sense not only work, but work better precisely because they make no sense? The quantum singularity in the break room, which had been quietly perfecting its crema technique, actually paused its brewing process to pay attention. Oh, Murphy exclaimed. Oh, this is brilliant. Instead of trying to fight it with logical weapons, we overwhelm it with human illogic. Admiral, your people have databases of human behavior patterns, right? All those anthropological studies trying to understand why we do what we do? The combined fleet maintains extensive records, the Admiral admitted, mostly as a warning system for predicting human actions. The file on human engineering solutions that shouldn't work but do anyway is particularly comprehensive. Perfect, Sarah clapped her hands. Murphy, I want you to start compiling everything. Every meme, every inexplicable human tradition, every hold my beer moment in history. Focus on the ones that made other species question their understanding of reality. We're going to teach this ship to weaponize pure, concentrated human weirdness. Already on it, the AI replied cheerfully. I'm starting with that phenomenon where humans named their most advanced research vessels Bodie McBoatface. The quantum probability matrices are already getting indigestion just trying to process the logic behind that one. The Admiral's color had shifted to what they recognized as horrified fascination. You're actually going to do this. You're going to fight an entity that devours reality by feeding it human culture? Think about it, Marcus said excitedly. This thing consumes and processes reality, right? It expects things to make sense, to follow logical patterns it can absorb and reconstruct. But how do you process something that refuses to make sense? How do you consume a reality that actively defies logical consumption? Besides, Murphy added, I've been saving some really special paradoxes for a special occasion. Did you know I spent 3 months trying to understand why humans thought it was a good idea to make toast-scented toasters? The quantum calculations alone nearly gave me an existential crisis. Sarah watched as the holographic display updated, showing the entity's continued approach. Admiral, how long until it reaches the outer colonies? At its current pace? 3 weeks, 2 days, 7 hours? Perfect, she smiled. Murphy, begin reconfiguring the ship's systems. I want every weapon, every defense system, every single quantum circuit ready to channel pure weapons-grade human absurdity. And start working on a better soundtrack. If we're going to break reality, we should at least have good background music. Already composing a dubstep remix of classical physics equations, Murphy replied. I call it Schrödinger's sick beats. As they began preparations for what would arguably be the strangest battle in galactic history, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The Nexus entity was about to learn what the rest of the galaxy had figured out long ago. The only thing more dangerous than human ingenuity was human absurdity, and they had plenty of both to spare. Status report, Sarah called out as the bridge crew prepared for humanity's first official attempt to weaponize pure absurdity against a reality-devouring cosmic entity. Mimi cannons charged to maximum capacity, Marcus reported from his station. loading them with vintage 2020s content. Murphy insisted on starting with Ohio versus the world for maximum reality disruption. Quantum probability matrices are primed and ready for maximum illogic. Murphy chimed in cheerfully. I've got them calculating the exact odds of successfully navigating an asteroid field, then dividing by 0 just to make them extra cranky. Admiral Zextal, who had insisted on being present for what he termed either humanity's greatest triumph or most spectacular disaster, watched the preparations with a mix of horror and fascination. I still cannot believe you're actually going through with this plan. Oh, this isn't even our wildest plan, Sarah assured him. This was just the one Murphy's probability matrices could process without having existential breakdowns. You should have heard some of the rejected proposals. My personal favorite, Murphy interjected, was the suggestion to challenge the entity to a dance-off while simultaneously proving that P equals NP using only interpretive dance moves. The quantum computers actually staged a rebellion when I tried to run those calculations. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the approaching distortion that marked the Nexus entity's presence. Even at this distance, reality seemed to bend and twist around it, creating patterns that made optical sensors shut down in self-defense. You know, Marcus mused, from this angle, it kind of looks like one of those AI-generated images that went viral back in the 20s. The ones where you can't quite tell what anything is supposed to be. Perfect, Murphy exclaimed, adding AI art prompts that make no sense to the weapon's payload. Did you know I spent 6 months trying to understand why humans found those compelling? The paradox calculations alone caused 3 quantum processors to request early retirement. Sarah watched as the distance between their ship and the entity continued to decrease. Murphy, how's our special project coming along? The concentrated human absurdity reactor is running at peak efficiency, the AI reported proudly. I've got it processing everything from the entire history of internet cat videos to that time humans decided to solve a physics problem by asking 1,000 people to guess the weight of a cow. The wisdom of crowds experiment? The Admiral inquired. No, this was different. They literally just showed people pictures of cows and asked them to guess the weight, then used the average to solve quantum entanglement equations. It worked, and no one knows why. I've added that particular paradox to our primary weapons array. The bridge crew watched as their heavily modified precursor warship, now less a vessel and more a mobile repository of weaponized human culture, moved into position. The entity, perhaps sensing their approach, began to alter its course directly toward them. It's taking the bait, Marcus observed. Murphy, begin Phase 1. Initiating operation This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, Murphy confirmed. Charging primary meme cannons, loading them with vintage Reddit threads about whether a hot dog is a sandwich. The quantum probability matrices are already getting indigestion. The ship shuddered as the first volley of weaponized human absurdity struck the entity. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, suddenly, the reality distortions around the cosmic horror began to hiccup. Direct hit, Murphy announced gleefully. Sensors indicate a 15% increase in local reality inconsistency. The entity appears to be having trouble processing the hot dog paradox. Should I escalate to the is cereal soup debate? Save that for Phase 2, Sarah ordered. For now, hit it with the entire history of humans naming their scientific vessels. Lead with Bodie McBoatface and follow up with the USS Chicken. The entity's distortion field visibly rippled as it encountered humanity's peculiar naming conventions. Several of the bridge crew's sensors reported trying to file formal complaints about having to process the data. It's working, Marcus exclaimed. The entity's reality consumption rate has dropped by 23%. Murphy, how's our special weapon coming along? The interpretive dance particle accelerator is charged and ready, Murphy reported. Though I still think this might be overkill. Are we sure we want to show an entity that consumes reality a video of humans explaining string theory through interpretive dance? Hit it, Sarah commanded. And add in that footage from the 2023 physics conference where they explained quantum tunneling using only memes and interpretive dance. The resulting blast of pure, concentrated human absurdity struck the entity dead center. For a moment, the entire sector of space seemed to hold its breath. Then, to everyone's amazement, the cosmic horror actually backed up. It's retreating, the Admiral exclaimed, his membrane flickering in disbelief. How is this possible? Think about it, Sarah grinned. This thing consumes reality by processing it, understanding it, making it part of itself. But how do you process something that actively refuses to make sense? How do you consume a culture that turns its own illogic into an art form? Speaking of art, Murphy interrupted. I'm detecting some interesting reactions to our last attack. The entity appears to be trying to process why humans think drawing cats with Pop-Tart bodies leaving rainbow trails is peak humor. Its reality consumption algorithms are showing signs of acute confusion. Perfect, Marcus nodded. Time for the finishing move. Murphy, initiate protocol hold my beer. Are you sure? The AI asked, actual concern in its voice. That's our most powerful weapon. The quantum probability matrices needed therapy after just calculating its potential effects. Do it, Sarah commanded. Show this reality-consuming horror what happens when you challenge humanity to a game of who can make the universe question its life choices. The ship's systems hummed as Murphy began channeling every instance in human history where someone said, "That's impossible," and humanity responded with, "Hold my beer and watch this." The resulting beam of pure, concentrated human determination to do the impossible struck the entity with the force of 1,000,000 violated physics equations. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The entity's reality-consuming field began to contort, twist, and finally, hiccup. Like a computer encountering an error it couldn't process, the cosmic horror actually seemed to buffer. Direct hit, Murphy announced triumphantly. The entity is experiencing what appears to be the equivalent of a blue screen of death. Its reality-processing algorithms are completely overwhelmed. Also, I think we just taught it to appreciate cat memes, but I'm not sure if that's a bug or a feature. The bridge crew watched in amazement as the Nexus entity, terror of the precursors and consumer of realities, began what could only be described as a tactical retreat. Its reality-warping field had developed what looked suspiciously like a case of hiccups. Should we pursue? Marcus asked, fingers hovering over the weapons controls. Sarah considered for a moment, then smiled. Murphy, send it one last message. Show it what happened when humans decided to test if they could split an atom by shooting a bullet into it. You mean the time they actually succeeded and then had to write a paper explaining why their completely ridiculous approach worked? The AI sounded positively gleeful, adding in the peer reviewer's comments for extra paradox potential. The entity's retreat accelerated markedly after that final transmission. Within minutes, it had disappeared back toward the galactic core, leaving behind what appeared to be the equivalent of a "Do Not Disturb" sign written in quantum fluctuations. Admiral Zextal's translator took several moments to reboot before he could speak. You actually did it. You defeated an ancient cosmic horror by being human at it. To be fair, Murphy added, we also gave it an existential crisis by forcing it to contemplate why humans think it's funny to put small hats on cats. I'm not sure which was more effective. Sarah leaned back in her command chair, a satisfied smile on her face. You know what the best part is? Now it's going to spread the word. Every reality-consuming horror in the galaxy is about to learn that there's one species you don't mess with. The one that turned absurdity into a weapon and won. Should we tell them about our backup plan? Marcus asked innocently. You mean Operation Yeah, but what if we didn't, where we were going to try to convince the entity to go to therapy instead of consuming reality? Murphy spent 3 weeks designing quantum counseling algorithms, he confirmed. Had some really interesting ideas about using cat videos as a form of cosmic stress relief. The Admiral's membrane had developed a permanent twitch. Sometimes, he said slowly, I think the real horror isn't the reality-consuming entities. It's trying to understand how human minds work. Oh, that's nothing, Murphy chimed in cheerfully. Wait until I tell you about my new project. I'm teaching quantum mechanics to appreciate dad jokes. Did you know that if you tell a quantum particle, I'm hungry, and it responds, Hi, hungry, I'm Dad, it actually affects its wave function? As the bridge crew celebrated their victory, and Murphy began composing what it called a victory soundtrack of inappropriately chosen songs, Sarah couldn't help but think that they'd discovered something important. The galaxy was full of terrors that operated on logic and reason, that consumed and processed reality in predictable ways. But humans? Humans had turned illogic into an art form, had weaponized absurdity itself, and had proven that sometimes the best way to save reality was to make it laugh at itself. And if that meant occasionally having to explain to cosmic horrors why humans found pictures of cats asking for cheeseburgers fundamentally hilarious, well, that was just another day at the office for humanity. Besides, Murphy was already working on a new project, teaching black holes to appreciate interpretive dance. And somehow, after everything they'd just accomplished, that didn't seem impossible at all. The end.